Fire devours Magdalenenburg plantation like a hungry beast. Orange flames lick the walls of the great house, while screams echo through the sugar fields. Black smoke spirals grotesquely against the night sky of Berbice. The year is 1763, and hell has come to the Dutch lands of Guyana. At the center of chaos, a man raises his bloodied cutlass. Cuffy stands over 6 feet tall, muscles sculpted by brutal labor, scars telling stories of whip and resistance. His eyes burn like coals. Around him, hundreds of enslaved Africans surge forward with torches, machetes, tools transformed into weapons. "Tonight we take back the land," shouts Cuffy, his voice cutting through air like sharpened blade. The sound of desperate hooves echoes across the veranda. 2 Dutch colonists stumble downstairs, clothes torn, faces pale with terror. Jacobus van der Heyden, the overseer who for years had whipped African bodies until they bled, now crawls like a worm. "Please, we have families," babbles van der Heyden, raising trembling hands. Cuffy approaches slowly, cutlass reflecting dancing flames. "So did we," he responds with cutting coldness. "Remember little Kwame? 10 years old. Died under your whip." The blade descends. Van der Heyden collapses. Blood spreads across wooden planks of the veranda like red paint. Behind Cuffy, an African woman of noble features holds a torch. Akosua, also Akan like him, bears ritual marks on her face that speak of lost royalty. She watches the carnage with eyes that have seen children torn from arms, husbands sold like cattle. "The other plantations?" she asks, voice low but firm. "Plantation Juliana has burned since sunset. Hollandia and Goede Fortuin will fall before dawn," responds Cuffy, cleaning his blade on the dead overseer's shirt. A young African runs toward them, sweat mixed with soot on his face. It's Ada, only 16 years old, but already branded with hot iron on his right shoulder. "Cuffy, Dutch soldiers, approaching by river. How many?" 2 boats, maybe 20 men. Cuffy smiles, but there's no joy in that smile. It's the smile of one who knows death and doesn't fear it. "Let them come. Tonight the spirits of ancestors fight with us." He turns to the crowd of Africans awaiting his orders. Men and women from different tribes, Akan, Igbo, Yoruba, Congo, united by pain and thirst for freedom. Some hold sugar machetes, others kitchen knives. All have eyes fixed on Cuffy. "Brothers, sisters," he shouts, voice echoing over crackling flames. "For years we were called animals, whipped like animals, sold like animals. But tonight, we show we are more than men. We are war." A collective roar explodes from the crowd. Fists rise, machetes gleam. The great house collapses with deafening crash, sparks flying like falling stars. In the middle of smoking ruins, Cuffy stands motionless, contemplating destruction. His kingdom of fire and blood has just been born. But this is only the beginning. The real test will come when sun rises, when the world discovers that Berbice slaves haven't merely rebelled, they have declared war on an empire. In dark waters of Berbice River, reflection of flames dances like ghosts. And on the bank, Cuffy whispers words his descendants will guard for centuries. "Let Nyame witness. Freedom has a price, and tonight we pay it." 6 months before the night plantations burned, Cuffy was just another number in Dutch colonial records. Plantation Magdalenenburg, property of Cornelis van Hugenheim, nephew of the governor. 300 enslaved Africans worked there under Guyana's scorching sun, cutting cane, processing sugar, building fortunes for men who never set foot in Africa. Cuffy had been captured in his homeland, coastal region of what we now know as Ghana, territory of the Akan people. He was only 22 when Portuguese traders ripped him from his village, chained his neck, and pushed him into the fetid hold of a slave ship. The voyage across Atlantic lasted 8 weeks. 200 Africans boarded. 143 arrived alive in Berbice. On plantations, Cuffy quickly distinguished himself. Tall, strong, intelligent, he was assigned to work as a cooper, a position requiring technical skill to build barrels where sugar would be stored. It was specialized work, giving him certain freedom of movement around the property, but mainly, it gave him access to tools. Overseer Jacobus van der Heyden was a short, stocky Dutchman, face reddened by sun and drink. He had come to Guyana fleeing debts in Amsterdam and found in plantations a kingdom where he could exercise absolute power over hundreds of human lives. His raw leather whip, nicknamed Devil's Tongue by slaves, left marks that never completely healed. "Work, black dog," shouted van der Heyden whenever Cuffy paused to wipe sweat. "This is no land for lazy ones." Cuffy never responded. He only watched with those eyes that seemed to store storms. Watched and memorized. Every injustice, every humiliation, every drop of spilled blood carved itself into his mind like hot iron. Plantation Magdalenenburg functioned like a machine for grinding people. Day began at 4 in morning with iron bell toll. Africans emerged from their quarters, wooden shacks where entire families crowded into spaces smaller than pig pens, and walked in line to sugar fields. There they remained until sunset, cutting cane under armed surveillance, backs burned by tropical sun, hands raw from machete handles. Food was scarce and poor quality. Spoiled cassava flour, salted fish that resembled leather more than food, muddy river water. Many developed scurvy, dysentery, tropical fevers. The sick were isolated in a hut slaves called Death House. Few emerged alive. But it was on a December afternoon in 1762 that Cuffy witnessed something that would forever change the course of his life. An Akan boy of 10 named Kwame had fainted in Sugarfield. Heat was unbearable. The child hadn't eaten for 2 days because van der Heyden had cut rations as punishment for collective laziness. "Get up, brat!" bellowed the overseer, kicks raining on the skeletal little body. Kwame tried to rise, legs wobbling, eyes rolling back. He fell again. Van der Heyden unsheathed his whip. Leather hissed through air and struck the child's bare back. Kwame screamed, a sound that seemed to tear the very sky. The whip rose and fell again, and again. "Stop!" Cuffy's voice echoed through sugar fields like thunder. Van der Heyden stopped, surprised. No slave had ever given him an order. He turned slowly, red face contorted in expression of disbelief and fury. "What did you say, animal?" Cuffy dropped the barrel he was carrying and stepped forward. Around them, other slaves stopped working. Silence was tense, as bowstring ready to snap. "I said stop. He's a child." Van der Heyden laughed, but it was humor without joy, loaded with poison. "Child? That thing is property. My property. And if I want to whip it to death, I will." The whip hissed again. This time, Cuffy moved. In motion quick as striking snake, he grabbed the overseer's wrist, fingers closing like iron claw. Van der Heyden tried to break free, but it was like trying to bend steel. "Release me, scoundrel! I'll send you to the stocks." For a moment, Cuffy considered breaking that fat wrist like dry stick. It would be so easy. But then he heard footsteps. 2 Dutch overseers approached running, muskets in hand. Cuffy released van der Heyden and stepped back. The overseer massaged his bruised wrist, eyes injected with hatred. "Take this demon to the stocks, 100 lashes. I want to see if he still has strength to challenge white men." The stocks was a wooden structure in Plantation Center, where slaves were tied to receive public punishments. Cuffy was stripped and chained, arms stretched above his head. Hundreds of Africans were forced to watch while van der Heyden prepared special whip, raw leather braided with metal pieces. "Look well!" shouted the overseer to crowd. "See what happens to those who forget their place." First blow tore piece of flesh from Cuffy's back. Second opened cut from shoulder to waist. But Cuffy didn't scream. He only gritted teeth and kept eyes fixed on horizon, where sun was setting like fireball. At 50 lashes, his consciousness began to slip. At 70, blood pooled on ground. At 90, van der Heyden had to stop to rest his arm. "Still alive?" he asked, panting. Cuffy raised his head slowly. Blood trickled from his mouth, but his eyes continued burning like coal embers. "Still alive," he whispered. Van der Heyden completed 100 lashes. When they finally released Cuffy from chains, he collapsed on ground like sack of ground meat. 2 slaves carried him to quarters, where Akosua, an Akan woman who knew medicinal herbs, treated his wounds with mashed leaves and wild honey. "Why did you do that?" she asked while cleaning coagulated blood. "Did you want to die?" Cuffy took time to respond. Each breath was a stab in lungs. "Couldn't let it happen. Kwame is just a child. And now, van der Heyden will watch you like hawk. Any false step, there will be no false step." Cuffy's voice was low, but something in it made Akosua shiver. "Next time I won't stop." Kwame died 3 days later. Fever took what whip had spared. Cuffy personally carried the small body to slave cemetery. Marshy ground where dead were buried without ceremony, without headstones, without Christian prayers. Only crude wooden markers that rotted under rain. That night, Cuffy did something he hadn't done since arriving in Guyana. He knelt in damp earth and spoke with ancestors in his mother tongue, Twi, Nananom, Spirits of those who came before, hear my promise. This innocent blood will not go unavenged. I swear by memory of my father, by strength of my mother, by bones of those who died in Great Salt River, this suffering will end. Strange wind blew through trees, making leaves whisper like ancient voices. Cuffy rose, and when he returned to quarters, Akosua noticed something different in his eyes. It was no longer just rage. It was determination, cold as iron. In following weeks, something changed at Plantation Magdalenenburg. Cuffy continued working, obeying orders, keeping head down. But in shadows, whispered conversations circulated among slaves. Words in Twi, Igbo, Yoruba, languages overseers didn't understand. Has time come? Asked one. Not yet. But soon, responded another. Does Cuffy have plan? Cuffy always has plan. The tall, silent African had become living legend among enslaved. They said he knew ancestral magic, could speak with dead, had strength of 10 men. None of this was true, but Cuffy didn't discourage rumors. He knew hope was more powerful weapon than any machete. In January 1763, news arrived that stirred entire colony. Plantation Godefortuin had suffered accidental fire that destroyed half sugar harvest. Plantation Hollandia reported disappearance of 15 slaves in single night. At Plantation Juliana, 2 Dutch overseers had died in suspicious accidents. Van der Heyden called meeting with other proprietors. They spoke of insurrection, conspiracy, need to increase surveillance. But their voices sounded nervous, loaded with poorly disguised fear. The blacks are restless, said Cornelis van Hugenheim during one such meeting. My uncle, the governor, believes we must make example, punish harshly any insubordination. I have one who needs breaking, responded Van der Heyden, eyes fixed on Cuffy working near Great House. That one there. Cuffy. Natural leader. Others follow him like dogs. Then we'll break him. But Cuffy could not be broken. He had been forged in fire of suffering, tempered by loss, sharpened by injustice. And now, with Kwame dead and buried in marshy ground, his transformation was complete. He was no longer just rebellious slave. He was force of nature about to be unleashed. Opportunity came on February morning. Van der Heyden had drunk too much night before and slept in his hut when accidental fire started in sugar warehouse. Amid confusion, Cuffy simply disappeared. When fire was controlled and overseers did count, they discovered it wasn't just Cuffy. 23 slaves had vanished like smoke. In depths of tropical forest, in secret camp built months before, Cuffy gathered his followers. Men and women from different tribes, now united by something stronger than origin or language. Thirst for freedom. Brothers, he said, voice echoing among giant trees, our time has come. No more will we flee like frightened rabbits. We fight like lions. Akosua, who had joined group bringing traditional medicine knowledge, rose beside Cuffy. Herbs speak to me of victory. Ancestors approve our war. Young Igbo named Akara, marked by brand irons on both arms, stepped forward. And after, when we destroy plantations, when we kill whites, after, what do we do? Cuffy looked into eyes of each person present. He saw fear, hope, rage, determination. He saw reflection of his own journey in every face marked by suffering. After, we build something new. Land where Africans govern Africans, where our children grow free, where our elders die with dignity, where our dead rest in peace. Dutch won't allow it, observed middle-aged Congo woman. Then Dutch will die. Cuffy's answer was said with such coldness that even his allies felt chill. This was no longer obedient Cooper of Plantation Magdalenenburg. This was something new, something dangerous. This was man who had looked into abyss and decided to jump. In following days, other groups of fugitive slaves joined Cuffy's camp. News of African leaders spread through plantations like fire in dry grass. Some came from desperation, others from curiosity, many from pure desire for vengeance. Among newcomers was man who would change rebellion's course. His name was Cuffy, African from Angola region, former soldier captured during tribal wars. Tall, thin, with ritual scars covering his chest, Cuffy had military knowledge Cuffy immediately recognized as valuable. Do you know about war? Asked Cuffy during first private conversation with Angolan. I fought Portuguese in my land. I know how whites think, how they move, where they are weak. And where are they weak? Cuffy smiled, but it was cruel smile. In darkness. At night they are blind as bats, and when they have fear they make mistakes. This information planted seed in Cuffy's mind. seed that would germinate into simple but devastating strategy. If they couldn't face Dutch in open field, they lacked sufficient firearms, formal military training, then they would attack in shadows. It would be ghost war, night terror, constant fear. "We'll teach them what terror is," murmured Cuffy, eyes lost in campfire flames. "They'll sleep with fear and wake with nightmares." In March 1763, first coordinated attacks began. They weren't direct assaults on main plantations, but surgical strikes causing maximum psychological impact. Sugar warehouse burned here, overseer found dead there, slaves disappearing in ever larger groups. Strategy was simple: isolate, terrorize, conquer. Each attacked plantation sent waves of panic through others. Dutch colonists, accustomed to seeing Africans only as docile property, suddenly found themselves hunted by shadows who knew every trail and forest, every river bend. Van der Heyden was first to die. Cuffy personally chose this revenge. On moonless night, he infiltrated plantation Magdalenenburg like ghost. He knew every loose board, every secret entrance. He had worked there long enough to map all vulnerable points. Overseer slept in his hut, snoring loudly, rum stench permeating air. Beside bed lay raw leather whip that had marked so many African backs. Cuffy took torturer's own weapon and wrapped it around Van der Heyden's fat neck. Dutchman woke choking, hands desperately trying to loosen tightening noose. In darkness, he saw only Cuffy's silhouette leaning over him. "Kwame sends regards," whispered Cuffy before tightening finally. When dawn came, other overseers found Van der Heyden hanging from ceiling beam, his own whip serving as rope. Message was carved in wallwood with knife tip: "Justice of ancestors." Van der Heyden's death sent shockwaves through entire Berbice colony. It wasn't just another accident or disappearance. It was deliberate, symbolic murder, declaration of war. Cornelis van Hugenheim called emergency meeting with all plantation owners. Atmosphere was tense, loaded with fear and paranoia. "Gentlemen," said van Hugenheim, voice trembling slightly, "we face total insurrection. These are no longer isolated escapes. This is war." "But war against whom?" asked elderly planter. "They are ghosts. Attack at night, disappear into forest. How do we fight what we cannot see?" "Increase surveillance, more guards, more weapons, more preventive punishments." "And if that doesn't work?" Heavy silence fell over room. Everyone knew answer, but none wanted to verbalize it. If preventive measures failed, if rebellion continued growing, they would have to appeal to total brute force. Extermination. While Dutch planned reprisals, Cuffy expanded operations. Original forest camp had become small city. Hundreds of ex-slaves now lived there, organized in basic military units, producing improvised weapons, training guerrilla tactics. Akosua established infirmary where she treated wounded with medicinal herbs. Koffij trained combat groups, teaching ambushes and night attacks. Other specialists emerged naturally. Blacksmiths transforming agricultural tools into weapons, carpenters building shelters, hunters providing meat. But most impressive was Cuffy's own transformation. Silent Cooper had become natural general. He planned campaigns with military precision, inspired fanatic loyalty, made difficult decisions without hesitation. "Tonight we attack Plantation Juliana," he announced in General Assembly. "It's largest in region. If it falls, others will panic." "Juliana has 40 armed guards," observed Akara. "We'll lose many men. We won't attack directly. We'll use fire." Cuffy unrolled crude map made on tree bark, showing plantation building layout. "Wind blows from west. We burn sugar fields during dawn. When they come out to fight fire, we attack Great House from behind." "And Juliana's slaves? Are they with us?" "Some yes. Others are afraid. But when they see plantation burning, when they see it's possible to win, they'll join us." Cuffy's prediction proved correct. Attack on plantation, Juliana was unilateral massacre. Sugar fields burned for hours, creating smokescreen that blinded defenders. When rebels emerged from shadows, they found minimal resistance. 40 Dutch guards died that night. Great House was reduced to ashes. Most important, 120 slaves from Juliana joined rebellion, almost doubling size of Cuffy's army. But victory also brought complications. With so many new recruits, internal tensions began emerging. Not everyone agreed with Cuffy's brutal methods. Not everyone accepted his leadership without question. Akara, in particular, began forming dissident faction. Young Igbo argued rebellion was becoming too violent, too radical. He preferred negotiating with Dutch, seeking agreements guaranteeing manumission in exchange for peace. "We kill too much," said Akara in tense meeting. "Whites will never negotiate if we continue murdering." "Negotiate?" Cuffy's voice was cutting ice. "Negotiate with those who enslaved us? Who whipped our children to death? Some whites are different. Not all are like Van der Heyden. All whites benefited from our suffering. All lived on our blood. There are no innocents among them." Division between Cuffy and Akara reflected fundamental dilemma that would torment liberation movements for centuries. Gradual reform or total revolution? Forgiveness or vengeance? Coexistence or domination? For now, Cuffy's faction remained majority. His methods were extreme, but produced results. Plantation after plantation fell under coordinated attacks. Territory controlled by rebels expanded continuously. In April 1763, Cuffy made decision that would forever change rebellion's nature. It would no longer be just insurrection of fugitive slaves. It would be something much more ambitious, much more dangerous. He would declare himself governor of Berbice. Ceremony took place in clearing in Forest Heart, under canopy of giant tree, Akan considered sacred. Hundreds of ex-slaves gathered, representing dozens of African tribes. It was largest assembly of free people of African origin ever seen in Americas. Akosua, acting as traditional priestess, anointed Cuffy's forehead with palm oil secretly brought from Africa. Coffage presented him with crown made of gold taken from ornaments stolen from Dutch great houses. "By power of ancestors, by strength of earth, by will of people, I declare Cuffy legitimate governor of Berbice," announced Akosua, voice echoing among trees. Cuffy rose, golden crown contrasting with his dark skin. For a moment, he remained silent, contemplating hundreds of faces watching him with mixture of hope and fear. "Brothers and sisters," he said finally, "for centuries, white men governed over us. They decided when we lived, when we died, when we ate, when we suffered. Today, this changes. Today, Africans govern Africans." Roar of approval exploded from crowd. Fists rose, voices joined in chant that would echo through Guyana forests. "Cuffy! Cuffy! Cuffy!" But declaring himself governor was one thing. Actually, governing was completely different. Cuffy quickly discovered leading rebel army was much simpler than administering territory with thousands of inhabitants. Practical questions began accumulating. How to feed so many people? How to resolve disputes between different tribal groups? How to establish laws everyone would respect? How to defend territory from inevitable Dutch counter-offensive? Cuffy tried applying traditional African governance principles. Councils of elders, decisions by consensus, justice based on reparation instead of punishment. But reality was more complex than theory. Resources were scarce. Conquered plantations produced sugar, but rebels had no way to sell it in international markets dominated by Europeans. Firearms were limited. Most still fought with machetes, spears, improvised bows. Worse still, not all ex-slaves supported new regime. Some preferred relative security of slavery to uncertainty of freedom. Others distrusted Cuffy, seeing him as potential dictator. Akara's faction gained strength, proposing negotiations with Dutch Governor Van Hugenheim. Secret meetings took place. Alternative plans were discussed. "Cuffy is leading us to destruction," argued Akara to his followers. "Dutch will never accept African government. They'll bring more soldiers, more ships, more cannons. We'll be crushed." "Then what do you propose?" asked one of his supporters. "Negotiation. We ask for manumission for all, maybe small territory where we can live in peace. In exchange, we stop attacks, return plantations." "And Cuffy? He'll never accept that." Cuffy can be removed if necessary." These words, spoken in dark hut, would mark beginning of end of Cuffy's dream. Rebellion that had united Africans against Dutch oppressors, now divided between Africans against Africans. Meanwhile, in Guyana's coastal cities, panic had taken over European population. Messengers arrived daily with worse news. More plantations destroyed, more colonists killed, more slaves fleeing to join Cuffy's army. Governor Van Hugenheim wrote desperate letter to Amsterdam authorities. "Colony is lost if we don't receive reinforcements immediately. Blacks are no longer fugitive slaves. They are organized army, led by man of remarkable intelligence. They declare themselves independent government. Situation is critical." Amsterdam's response was quick and brutal. 3 warships departed Holland loaded with professional soldiers, cannons, modern muskets. Order was simple. Crush rebellion with maximum force, no mercy, no prisoners. But before reinforcements arrived, Van Hoogenheim tried final diplomatic strategy. He sent secret emissaries to territory controlled by Cuffy, proposing negotiations. Message reached Cuffy through informant network he had established in coastal cities. Dutch governor offered general amnesty in exchange for surrender, recognition of manumission for all rebels, and even small territory where they could live as free men. Cuffy called war council to discuss proposal. Room was divided. Coffage and other militants rejected any negotiation. Akara and his followers pressed for acceptance. "It's trap," said Coffage, chest scars glistening with sweat. "Whites never keep word given to Africans." "But what if it's real?" counter-argued Akara. "We've conquered much. Maybe it's time to consolidate gains." Cuffy listened to arguments in silence, mind-weighing options. Part of him knew Akara was right. Dutch would certainly bring reinforcements. Rebellion, however successful, had limits. They couldn't face European military power indefinitely. But another part forged by van der Heyden's whip, tempered by Kwame's death, couldn't accept compromises. There was too much spilled blood, too much accumulated suffering, too much dignity at stake. "We'll send emissaries," he decided finally. "We'll hear proposals, but we won't surrender. We negotiate as equals, or we don't negotiate." It was an attempt to balance internal factions, but ended satisfying no one completely. Coffage considered decision too weak. Akara considered it too rigid. Cracks in rebel movement deepened. Negotiations with Dutch began in May 1763, at abandoned plantation used as neutral territory. Cuffy sent his best diplomats, including Akara, who secretly hoped talks would be successful. From Dutch side, Van Hoogenheim sent his best negotiator, a man named Willem van der Berg, who had dealt with native populations and knew how to conduct colonial diplomacy. First sessions were tense, but productive. Dutch, surprised by sophistication of African arguments, began seriously considering rebel demands. Recognition of manumission, autonomous territory, reparations for years of slavery. "These are interesting proposals," admitted van der Berg after a particularly intense session. "But my superiors in Amsterdam must approve any agreement." "How long?" asked Akara. "Weeks, maybe months. Communications with Europe are slow. And during this time? What happens with hostilities? Ceasefire. Neither side attacks other while we negotiate." Akara returned to rebel camp with high hopes. Finally, it seemed possible solution that didn't involve more bloodshed. Maybe Cuffy was wrong. Maybe it was possible to coexist with Dutch. But Cuffy received news with deep skepticism. Something about negotiations bothered him. Instinctive sense of danger he couldn't shake. "I don't trust them," he told Akosua in private conversation. "Van Hoogenheim is buying time for something." "For what?" Talks seemed genuine. "Reinforcements. He's waiting for reinforcements from Europe." Akosua frowned. Possibility hadn't occurred to her. "And if you're right, what do we do?" "We prepare for war. Real war." While negotiations continued, Cuffy quietly began preparing for worst-case scenario. He ordered smiths to produce more weapons, sent scouts to identify weak points in Dutch defensive positions, began stockpiling food and supplies. Coffage supported these preparations enthusiastically. "Finally, you see sense," said Angolan warrior. "Never trust whites. They speak peace while sharpening knives." But preparations also increased tensions within rebel movement. Many ex-slaves were war-weary, hoping for peaceful resolution. Others began questioning whether Cuffy was sabotaging potential peace out of vengeful stubbornness. Internal crisis came to head in June 1763. During heated assembly, Akara finally challenged Cuffy's leadership openly. "You are leading us to destruction," accused Akara. "Dutch offer freedom, land, recognition, but it's not enough for you. You want total war until every white person is dead." Cuffy rose slowly, eyes burning with controlled fury. "And you are leading us to chains," he replied coldly. "Different chains, maybe golden chains, but chains nonetheless. Freedom with limitations is better than death with glory." "Says who?" "Says you. Who elected you to speak for all of us?" "Who elected you?" "You declared yourself governor. Nobody voted." Accusation hung in air like poison. Around them, hundreds of ex-slaves watched confrontation with growing unease. This was more than political disagreement. This was fundamental schism about nature of liberation itself. Cuffy stepped forward, close enough to Akara that he could whisper without others hearing. "You want to challenge my leadership? Fine. But do it properly. Traditional combat. Winner leads, loser follows or leaves." Akara hesitated. He knew Cuffy's reputation as fighter. but backing down now would mean losing all credibility. Agreed. Combat took place next dawn, in same sacred clearing where Cuffy had been crowned governor. No weapons allowed, bare hands only. Traditional African contest that would determine leadership through strength and skill. Cuffy was older, more experienced, hardened by years of abuse. But Akara was younger, faster, motivated by desperation and ideological conviction. Fight was brutal. Both men were skilled warriors, both had everything to lose. Blood flew, bones cracked, breathing became labored. For 30 minutes, neither gained clear advantage. Then Akara made mistake. Momentary overextension, brief loss of balance. Cuffy seized opportunity, grappling younger man to ground, arm wrapped around his throat. "Yield," demanded Cuffy. Akara struggled, but hold was too strong. Consciousness began to fade. "I yield," he gasped finally. Cuffy released him immediately, then offered hand to help him stand. Gesture was significant. Victory without humiliation. Strength with mercy. "You fought well," said Cuffy publicly. "Your concerns are valid, but leadership requires making hard choices, including choosing when to fight and when to negotiate. And your choice?" Cuffy looked around at assembled crowd, hundreds of faces waiting for his decision. Many showed fear, others hope, some resignation. These were people who had suffered more than any humans should suffer. They deserved better than continued war, but they also deserved better than false promises. "We continue negotiations," he said finally, "but we prepare for war. If Dutch prove treacherous, we will be ready." It was compromise satisfying neither faction completely, but keeping movement united. Akara accepted decision grudgingly. Carthage grumbled, but obeyed. Rebellion remained intact, if more fragile than before. Unknown to Africans, Cuffy's instincts about Dutch treachery were absolutely correct. Van Hoogenheim had indeed been stalling for time, waiting for promised reinforcements from Amsterdam. 3 warships were already crossing Atlantic, loaded with professional soldiers and modern weapons. Meanwhile, Governor had been using ceasefire to strengthen defensive positions, gather intelligence about rebel capabilities, and plan devastating counteroffensive. "How much longer?" asked Vanderberg during private meeting. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Ships should arrive by end of June. And then? Then we end this rebellion permanently. No prisoners, no mercy, no negotiations. We make example that will prevent slave uprisings for next century. But secrets are hard to keep in colonial societies. Word of approaching warships reached rebel intelligence network through sympathetic slaves working in port. Information traveled quickly through forest, reaching Cuffy within hours of ships being sighted on horizon. Cuffy received news in his private hut, alone, except for Akosua. Implications were immediately clear. Negotiations were indeed trap, designed to keep rebels inactive while Dutch military strength was reinforced. "How long before they arrive?" asked Akosua. 3 days? Maybe 4? What do we do? Cuffy stood silent for a long moment, staring at map of Berbice drawn on bark. Red marks indicated conquered plantations. Blue marks showed Dutch strongholds. Green marks represented rebel territory. For months, map had shown steady expansion of green areas. Now everything might change. "We attack first," he said finally. "Tonight." "Tonight? But we're not ready for major offensive. We're never going to be more ready than now. Once those warships arrive, we lose any chance of surprise. Better to strike while they think we're still negotiating." Cuffy emerged from his hut and sounded war horn, carved elephant tusk that could be heard for miles through forest. Within minutes, warriors began gathering in central clearing. Word spread like wildfire. Time for talk was over. "Brothers! Sisters!" called Cuffy when assembly was complete. "Dutch have betrayed us." Even as they spoke peace, they prepared war. "Their ships come with soldiers to slaughter us all." Angry murmurs rippled through crowd. Some were shocked, others unsurprised. Akara's face showed bitter vindication. He had hoped for peace, but never really trusted Dutch promises. "What do we do?" called someone from crowd. "We show them that Africans are not victims to be slaughtered," responded Cuffy, voice rising to battlefield roar. "Tonight we attack every Dutch stronghold simultaneously. We burn their cities, sink their ships, destroy their power forever." Response was electric. Months of tension, weeks of frustrated waiting, years of accumulated rage all exploded in thunderous war cry that echoed through forest canopy. But even as his people cheered, Cuffy knew truth. This was not strategy for victory. It was strategy for survival. Arriving Dutch forces would be too strong for direct confrontation. Best hope was to inflict so much damage, create so much chaos that any victory would be Pyrrhic. If they could not win, at least they could ensure cost of defeating them would be remembered for generations. Attack began at midnight. 7 strike forces, each targeting different Dutch positions, moved through darkness like hunting predators. Cuffy led largest group against main port town of New Amsterdam, where arriving warships would dock. Assault was swift and devastating. Dutch guards, relaxed by weeks of ceasefire, were caught completely off guard. Warehouses full of sugar and tobacco burst into flames, creating towers of fire visible for miles. Wooden dock structures burned like giant torches, casting dancing shadows on dark water. Cuffy fought with fury of man who knew this might be his last battle. His cutlass rose and fell like metronome of vengeance, each stroke cutting down Dutch soldiers who had never imagined slaves could be so organized, so effective, so ruthlessly professional. "For Kwame!" he shouted as his blade found another target. "For all children who died under your whips!" By dawn, 6 of 7 targets had fallen. Only main fortress, built of stone and heavily defended, continued to resist. But damage was done. Port facilities were destroyed, supply depots burned, much of colonial administration killed or fled. As sun rose over smoke-covered landscape, Cuffy stood on ruins of Dutch warehouse, surveying destruction. Around him, his warriors cheered and celebrated. But he felt no joy, only grim satisfaction. They had struck powerful blow, but war was far from over. On horizon, 3 dark shapes appeared. Dutch warships, arriving exactly as intelligence had predicted. Too late to prevent attack, but not too late for revenge. Cuffy watched ships approach, their cannons already being readied for bombardment. In his mind, he began calculating how long his forces could hold out, how much damage they could inflict before being overwhelmed. "What now?" asked Coffage, joining him on warehouse ruins. "Now we show them that killing us will cost more than they want to pay," replied Cuffy. First cannon shot echoed across water like thunder, announcing beginning of final phase of rebellion. Ball splashed harmlessly in harbor, but message was clear. No quarter would be given, no mercy shown. Cuffy raised his cutlass toward approaching ships, blade catching morning sunlight. "Come then," he whispered. "Let us see who bleeds more, chains or free." Final battle for Berbice was about to begin. Dutch warships anchored just beyond harbor, cannons trained on burning port. For hours they bombarded ruins methodically, turning wooden buildings into splinters and stone structures into rubble. Africans, lacking artillery of their own, could only take cover and wait for shelling to end. When ships finally fell silent, Dutch Marines began landing on beach. Professional soldiers in red uniforms, armed with modern muskets and bayonets, trained in European warfare. They advanced in disciplined formations that no amount of courage could break through frontal assault. Cuffy, watching from forest edge, recognized immediately that conventional battle was impossible. His warriors, however brave, were mostly armed with agricultural tools and captured weapons. They could not match European military technology in open combat. "Back to forest," he ordered quietly. "We fight as ghosts again." Retreat was orderly but dispiriting. For months, rebellion had been advancing, conquering territory, building something new. Now they were running again, hiding again, reduced to guerrilla tactics that could harass but not defeat. Dutch advance was relentless. Village after village fell to their professional troops. Stone Fortress, which had resisted African assault, became their base of operations. From there, they launched systematic sweeps of countryside, burning rebel camps and executing anyone suspected of supporting uprising. But forest was vast, and Africans knew every tree, every stream, every hidden path. What followed was not conventional war, but deadly game of cat and mouse that stretched through sweltering summer months. Cuffy adapted his strategy to reality. Instead of trying to hold territory, his forces became completely mobile. They struck at Dutch patrols, then vanished into green shadows. They poisoned water supplies, then disappeared before retaliation arrived. They set forest fires to trap enemy units, then faded away like smoke. Psychological effect on Dutch forces was devastating. Soldiers began to crack under constant pressure of invisible enemies. Every shadow might conceal spear thrower. Every sound might signal ambush. Men deserted or went mad. Officers struggled to maintain discipline among troops who saw death lurking behind every tree. "This is not war," complained one Dutch captain to his superior. "This is hunting. We are prey." "Then we change rules," responded colonel in command. "If they want to fight like animals, we treat them like animals." Dutch response was brutal but effective. Instead of chasing rebels through forest, they began targeting civilian settlements. Villages suspected of supporting uprising were burned completely. Captured Africans, whether combatants or not, were executed publicly as examples. Most devastatingly, they began targeting families. Women and children, previously left alone, became deliberate military targets. Message was clear: support rebellion, and everyone you love will die. Strategy worked. One by one, rebel supporters began surrendering or fleeing to other colonies. Network of villages that had supplied Cuffy's army dried up. Food became scarce, medicine unavailable, safe shelter impossible to find. By August 1763, rebellion was on its last legs. What began as army of thousands had been reduced to few hundred die-hard fighters, constantly on move, constantly hungry, constantly hunted. Worse, internal divisions that had plagued movement from beginning were tearing it apart completely. Akara's faction, vindicated in their caution about negotiating, began openly questioning whether continued resistance served any purpose except prolonging suffering. "We have fought well," argued Akara during one of last rebel councils. "We have shown that Africans can organize, can lead, can govern. But now we are just prolonging agony." "Surrender means slavery," responded Cuffy harshly. "Or death. Dutch are executing everyone they capture. Some might be granted mercy, especially if we surrender voluntarily, show repentance." "You believe Dutch mercy?" Cuffy spoke for first time, voice heavy with exhaustion. "After what we have seen? After what they have done? I believe continued fighting serves no purpose except feeding your pride." Accusation hung in humid air like physical weight. Around small council fire, remaining leaders of rebellion stared at each other across unbridgeable gulf of philosophical difference. Cuffy rose slowly, body showing strain of months of constant warfare. Scars from recent battles crisscrossed his torso. His eyes, once bright with revolutionary fire, now burned with something darker and more desperate. "My pride," he said quietly. "You think this is about my pride?" He walked to edge of forest clearing, pointing toward distant glow of Dutch fires. "Every night I hear them. Children crying, women screaming, men begging for death. Not just from tonight, but from every night for years, decades, centuries." He turned back to face council. This was never about winning. This was about proving we are human, that we can fight, that we can choose death over chains. "And what has it proven?" demanded Akara. "That blacks can kill whites? World already knew that. What we needed to prove was that we could live together, build together. Build on whose terms? Their terms? Always their terms?" Debate continued through night, but both men knew it was pointless. They were talking past each other, separated by fundamentally different visions of what liberation meant. When dawn broke, rebel movement formally split. Akara took about half remaining fighters and attempted to negotiate surrender with Dutch authorities. He was captured during first meeting and executed immediately, his head displayed on spike as warning to other potential deserters. Cuffy, leading final loyalists, retreated deeper into forest for what everyone knew would be last stand. End came in September 1763. Dutch forces, guided by African turncoats, finally located last rebel stronghold. It wasn't much, collection of lean-tos around Muddy Creek, perhaps 200 desperate souls armed with rusty machetes and broken dreams. Cuffy knew escape was impossible this time. Dutch had surrounded area completely, using tactics learned from months of forest warfare. There would be no slipping away in darkness, no vanishing into green shadows. He gathered his remaining followers in center of camp. These were truest believers. Ones who chose death over surrender even when surrender might have meant survival. "My brothers and sisters," he said, voice carrying easily in humid stillness. "Today, we make our final choice. They offer us chains or graves. I choose graves." Murmurs of agreement rippled through small crowd. These people had seen too much, lost too much, fought too hard to accept defeat gracefully. "But before we die," continued Cuffy, "let us remember what we accomplished. For 1 year, Africans governed African land. For 1 year, black children played free. For 1 year, we proved slaves could become kings." He drew his cutlass one final time, blade that had tasted so much Dutch blood. "They will write that we were rebels, criminals, animals. But we know truth. We were first free Africans in New World." Attack began at noon. Dutch Marines advanced through forest in disciplined lines, muskets loaded, bayonets fixed. They expected fierce resistance, perhaps final desperate charge. Instead, they found something that would haunt them for rest of their lives. Cuffy stood alone in center of clearing, cutlass in one hand, pistol in other. Around him, his followers lay dead, not from Dutch bullets, but from poison brewed by Akosua from forest plants. They chose their deaths, chose their dignity, chose freedom in only way left available. Dutch soldiers stopped, unsure how to proceed. This was not battlefield combat. This was something else entirely, something that made them deeply uncomfortable. Cuffy looked at them across small distance that separated life from death, slavery from freedom, history from legend. "Tell your children," he called out, voice carrying clearly in sudden silence. "Tell them Cuffy was here. Tell them Africans ruled Berbice for 1 year." He raised pistol to his own temple. "And tell them we were not property. We were people." Shot echoed through forest like thunder, followed by silence so complete that even birds stopped singing. When Dutch authorities searched bodies, they found something unexpected. Cuffy carried in his pocket document written in careful Dutch script, Constitution for Free African State of Berbice. It outlined laws based on traditional African governance, plans for education, provisions for different tribal customs. It was dream made tangible, vision of what might have been if rebellion had succeeded. Dutch burned it immediately, but several officers read it first. They would never speak of what they saw, but neither would they ever forget. Word of Cuffy's death spread quickly through slave communities of Caribbean. Story grew in telling, becoming legend, becoming myth, becoming something more powerful than historical fact. In Jamaica, slaves whispered about African king who ruled Berbice. In Haiti, revolutionaries invoked his name for courage. In Brazil, Quilombo leaders held ceremonies honoring his memory. Across diaspora, Cuffy became symbol of resistance, of possibility that chains could be broken. Dutch authorities tried to suppress stories, but they spread anyway. Too many people needed to believe freedom was possible, that slavery was not permanent, that Africans could be more than property. Years passed, decades. Dutch colony of Berbice was eventually absorbed into British Guyana. Slavery itself was gradually abolished throughout Caribbean. New governments rose and fell, but memory of Cuffy endured. In 1970, when Guyana gained independence from Britain, new nation chose its national symbols carefully. Coat of arms featured harpy, eagle, and jaguar, representing soaring spirit and fierce courage of Guyanese people. But it also featured something else. Crossed pickaxe and sugarcane stalk, representing labor that built country. And at top, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, there was small star representing brief moment when Africans ruled land their labor had made valuable. Every February 23rd, Guyanese children learn about Republic Day, celebrating independence and democracy. But older residents remember that February is also month when Cuffy began his rebellion. Timing is not coincidental. In schools across Guyana, teachers tell sanitized versions of story. Cuffy becomes freedom fighter rather than rebel slave. His methods smoothed over, his violence contextualized, his legacy claimed by modern state that needs heroes from its colonial past. But in villages along Berbice River, in communities where descendants of African slaves still live and work, story is told differently. There, Cuffy is not distant historical figure but ancestral spirit, presence that can be felt when courage is needed most. He never left, say old women who brew traditional medicines from forest plants. Still here, still watching, still protecting. Nonsense, respond younger generations, educated in Western schools, trained in scientific thinking. But even skeptics sometimes pause when walking alone through forest at night, when shadows seem to move without wind, when they hear voices speaking in languages their grandparents knew. Rebellion lasted 1 year. Legend lasts forever. Today, if you visit Guyana and ask about Cuffy, most people can tell you official story. African slave, led rebellion, declared himself governor, died fighting for freedom. Facts are preserved in history books, museums, government monuments. But if you ask right people in right places, you might hear other stories. About how Cuffy's spirit still roams forests, helping runaway children find safety. About how his voice can be heard in thunderstorms, calling for justice. About how his strength flows through anyone who refuses to bow, who chooses dignity over comfort, who remembers that freedom is not given, but taken. These stories are not history in any academic sense. They are mythology, folklore, collective memory transformed into something larger than fact. But they serve purpose that historical accuracy cannot. They keep alive knowledge that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that systems of oppression can be challenged, that powerful are not invincible. In a world that often feels dominated by forces beyond individual control, Legend of Cuffy offers something precious. Proof that one person's courage can light fires that burn for centuries. Physical rebellion was crushed in 1763. Spiritual rebellion continues. And somewhere in forests of Guyana, where morning mist rises from dark rivers and ancient trees reach toward limitless sky, echo of war cry still lingers. Faint but unmistakable, carried on wind that has blown since before Europeans arrived, since before Africans were brought in chains, since land itself was young. It is cry of man who chose freedom over safety, dignity over survival, legend over life. It is cry of Cuffy, African who transformed chains into government, if only for one blazing year when anything seemed possible, and future belonged to those brave enough to seize it. His name was Cuffy. He ruled Berbice. He died free. That is how story ends, and how it begins again.